The escape pod drifted through the wreckage of the battle for what felt like hours, spinning slowly in the void while Sarah and Vethrak sat in silence and watched the destruction. Through the tiny viewport, the Keth-Ari fleet was broken ships that had hidden so confidently in the nebula were now scattered, debris fields glowing with the fires of their own engines, and those that had survived were fleeing into deeper space, abandoning their wounded and their dead without a backward glance. They do not even try to save each other, Sarah observed, watching a crippled Keth-Ari cruiser tumble past with its lights still flickering. Your commanders would rather let them die than risk more ships in a rescue. That is the way of the hegemony, Vethrak said, but his voice carried something new. Something that sounded almost like shame. Damaged units are inefficient. Resources should not be wasted on those who have already failed. And what about you? Sarah asked, turning to look at him. You are damaged now. At least in their eyes, you are a unit that failed to follow orders, that chose to help an enemy instead of completing your function. Vethrak was quiet for a long moment. I have wondered the same thing, he admitted. By every measure I was raised to value, I am worthless now. I cannot return to the hegemony because they would terminate me on sight. I have no hive, no purpose, no function. He turned his compound eyes toward her, and yet I do not feel worthless. I feel more alive than I have ever felt, more present in my own existence. Is this what individuality means to your kind? Before Sarah could answer, a shadow fell across the viewport, and she looked up to see the massive hull of a human warship descending toward them, the UGN's Persistent Hope. Its name painted across the bow in letters that seemed impossibly bright against the darkness of space. A tractor beam locked onto their pod and began pulling them toward an open hangar bay. And Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes for the first time since she had woken in that alien cell. She was going home. The pod landed with a gentle thump, and the hatch was immediately surrounded by armed Marines in full combat armor, their weapons raised and ready. Lieutenant Yoon Sarah, a voice called from outside. If you can hear me, identify yourself and any others aboard. It is me, Sarah called back, her voice cracking with emotion. I have one Keth-Ari with me, Sub-Commander Vethrak. He's a defector and he is under my protection. I gave him my word. There was a pause. Then the hatch was pulled open from outside, and Sarah found herself looking at the wary faces of a dozen human soldiers. They stared at Vethrak with undisguised hostility. And she could not blame them. His people had just tried to destroy an entire rescue fleet, had killed countless humans in the battle that still raged around them, but they did not fire. Sir, one of the Marines said into his communicator, we have the survivor secured. She has a prisoner with her. Says he is a defector. More voices crackled through the comm, too faint for Sarah to hear clearly. And then the Marine nodded and stepped aside. Medical is waiting for you, Lieutenant, he said. The alien comes too, but he stays under guard until the Admiral can figure out what to do with him. Sarah climbed out of the pod on shaking legs, and when her feet touched the deck of the human ship, she felt something release in her chest that she had been holding tight for days. She was alive, against all odds. Against every calculation, she was alive and free and surrounded by her own people. Vethrak followed her more slowly, his forearms raised in what he hoped the humans would recognize as a gesture of surrender. And the Marines formed up around him with weapons ready, but not aimed. They walked through corridors filled with activity. Crew members rushing to battle stations and damage control teams heading to sections of the ship that had been hit in the fighting. And everywhere Sarah went, she saw the same expression. On human faces, relief. They had come to save her, and they had succeeded, and now they were welcoming her home with tears in their eyes and hands, reaching out to touch her shoulder as she passed one person, one individual. And all of this had been for her, The medical bay was bright and clean, and smelled of antiseptic instead of copper and rot. And Sierra almost collapsed onto the examination table as the doctors began treating her wounds. Vethrak was taken to a separate area, still under guard. But Sierra could see him through the transparent divider that separated them. He sat motionless on an alien bed that was clearly not designed for his anatomy, watching the human medical staff with those glittering compound eyes. And she wondered what he was thinking. She found out 3 days later at the Galactic Union hearing. The Battle of the Verith Nebula was over. The Cathari ambush shattered. And now the diplomats and generals wanted answers. Sarah sat in a witness chair before a panel of admirals and senators and alien representatives. Her arms still in a sling, but her voice steady as she recounted everything that had happened. When she finished, they asked her about Vethrak. "You gave your word that you would speak for him," Admiral Chun said, her face carefully neutral. "So speak." Sierra looked across the chamber to where Vethrak sat in a containment field, surrounded by guards. Looking smaller somehow than he had on his own ship. "He was ordered to kill me," she said, "when the battle turned and I was no longer useful as bait. His commanding officer broadcast an order for my immediate termination. And Vethrak was the one assigned to carry it out." She let that sink in before continuing. "He did not do it. Instead, he asked me questions. He tried to understand why humans behave the way we do. And when the moment came to choose between his orders and his conscience, he chose his conscience. The Cathari do not have conscience." One of the alien representatives interjected. A Telvari diplomat whose species had been at war with the hegemony for generations. "They are hive creatures. They follow orders. They do not think for themselves. That is what everyone believes," Sierra agreed. "And maybe it is true for most of them. But Vethrak is different. He wondered, he questioned. He hesitated when everything in his training told him not to." She stood up from her chair and walked toward the containment field, ignoring the protests from the guards. "You asked me once why I would risk the entire operation on the chance that one enemy soldier might show mercy," she said. And now she was speaking to the admirals, but looking at Vethrak. "And the answer is simple." She pressed her palm against the containment field, feeling it hum with energy, because the bait has to believe it can live, and so does everyone else. "If we want to end this war, we need the Cathari to understand that individuals matter, that one person can make a difference, that choosing to be more than your function is possible." She turned back to the panel. "Vethrak is proof that understanding is possible. He is the first Cathari to ever defect, the first to ever choose individuality over the hive. And if we treat him as a prisoner instead of an ally, we will be proving everything the hegemony teaches about us." The chamber was silent. Admiral Chun leaned forward in her chair. "What are you asking for, Lieutenant?" Sierra took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to give him a chance. Let him share what he knows about the hegemony. Let him help us understand his people. And let us show him what it means to belong to something that values who you are, instead of just what you can do." She looked at Vethrak again. And this time, she saw something in those alien eyes that she recognized. It was the same thing she had felt when the persistent hope pulled her out of the void hope. The admirals deliberated. For less than an hour before reaching their decision, Vethrak would be granted provisional asylum, assigned to a human integration program, and allowed to provide intelligence on the Cathari hegemony in exchange for protection and eventual citizenship in the Galactic Union when the verdict was announced. Sarah walked to the containment field as it powered down and extended her hand to the alien who had once held her captive. "Welcome to humanity," she said. Vethrak looked at her hand for a moment, then reached out with one of his smaller arms and wrapped his fingers around hers. His grip was strange, cool and segmented, but it was gentle. "I do not understand your kind," he said, his translator giving the words an almost wondering quality. You risk everything for one person. You forgive your enemies. You believe that anyone can change. He paused, and his mandibles clicked in that pattern she now knew was hope. But I would like to learn. Syrah smiled and squeezed his hand. That is all any of us can do, she said. Keep learning, keep growing, keep believing that the next moment can be better than the last. She led him out of the chamber and into a future that neither of them could have imagined. A future where one human prisoner and one Cathari defector had proven that the greatest strength of all was not weapons or tactics or military might. It was the simple, stubborn belief that every life mattered, and that the bait did not have to die for the trap to work. The corridors of the Knife of Purpose had become a nightmare of flashing emergency lights and screaming alarms. Syrah ran alongside Vethrak, her bare feet slapping against the cold metal floor, her injured arm throbbing with every step. But she did not slow down, because slowing down meant dying. Cathari crew members rushed past them in both directions, some heading to battle stations, others fleeing from sections of the ship that had been breached by human weapons fire. None of them stopped to question why their sub-commander was running beside the prisoner, instead of dragging her body to the disposal chutes. The ship lurched violently, and Syrah stumbled, catching herself against the wall as an explosion somewhere below decks sent tremors through the entire vessel. The escape pods are on deck 7, Vethrak said, his translator barely audible over the chaos. But we must pass through the secondary command center to reach them. There will be officers there who will question my actions. Can you order them to stand down? Syrah asked. Vethrak's mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as bitter amusement. I have already violated 17 protocols by not executing you. My authority exists only as long as no one realizes what I have done. The moment I am challenged, I will be considered corrupted and marked for termination. Syrah processed this information quickly. The Cathari had no concept of individual conscience, no framework for a soldier who chose to disobey orders based on personal belief. To them, Vethrak was not a person making a moral choice, but a malfunctioning unit that needed to be destroyed. Then we do not give them time to question you, she said. We move fast and we do not stop. Anyone who tries to interfere gets left behind. She looked at him with steady eyes. Can you fight your own people if it comes to that? Vethrak was silent for a moment, and Syrah could almost see the conflict playing out behind those compound eyes. Everything he had been raised to believe told him that the hive came first, that individual lives meant nothing compared to the collective good, that betraying his species was the ultimate sin. But something else was stirring in him now, something that the Cathari had tried to breed out of their population for generations: the ability to question. I do not know, he admitted finally. But I know that I cannot kill you, and I know that the orders I was given feel wrong in a way I cannot explain. Perhaps that is enough for now. Syrah nodded. It is enough, she said. The rest you can figure out later. Assuming we survive the next 10 minutes. They moved through the ship with desperate speed, Vethrak using his authority to clear corridors, and Syrah staying close behind him, trying to look like a prisoner being transported, rather than an ally being protected. It worked until they reached the secondary command center. The door slid open to reveal a room full of Cathari officers, clustered around tactical displays, all of them watching the destruction of their fleet with expressions that Syrah was learning to read as shock and horror. One of them turned as Vethrak entered and immediately fixed on Syrah with hostile eyes. Sub-commander, the officer said, and her voice through the translator was sharp with suspicion. Why is the prisoner outside her cell? Has the order been given for termination? I am transporting her to a more secure location, Vethrak said, and his translator gave no hint of the lie. The holding cell was damaged in the attack. The officer stepped closer. her upper arms folding across her thorax in a gesture of challenge. "There is no more secure location on this ship," she said. And the termination order was broadcast to all officers 30 cycles ago. You were instructed to execute the bait immediately. Yet here she stands alive and unrestrained. Other officers were turning now, their compound eyes glittering with suspicion. And Sira felt the situation sliding toward violence with terrifying speed. "I am still your sub-commander," Vethrak said, drawing himself up to his full height, "and I will explain my actions when this crisis has passed. For now you will stand aside and let me complete my task." "Your task was to kill her," the officer replied, and her smaller arms moved toward the weapon at her side. "You have failed that task, which means you are compromised. Which means you are no longer our sub-commander." She drew her weapon and pointed it at Vethrak's thorax. "Step away from the human," she ordered, "or be terminated alongside her." Sira watched Vethrak freeze, caught between two impossible choices. And she understood in that moment that he was not ready to cross the final line. He had questioned his orders. He had spared her life. He had even agreed to flee with her. But actually fighting against his own people was something his mind could not yet accept, so Sarah made the choice for him. She moved before the officer could react, closing the distance between them in 3 quick steps and driving her elbow into the soft joint between the Catharis. Thorax and abdomen, the officer doubled over with a high-pitched clicking sound that the translator could not render. And Sira grabbed her weapon arm, twisting it until the gun clattered to the floor. The other officers lunged toward her, but Vethrak was finally moving, his larger arms sweeping 2 of them aside while his smaller arms grabbed Sira and pulled her toward the far door. "Run," he shouted, and his translator made the words sound almost human. They crashed through the door and into another corridor, leaving chaos and shouting behind them. And Sira's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Deck 7, she gasped. "How far?" "2 more levels," Vethrak replied, and he was breathing hard too. Or whatever the Kethari equivalent of breathing was. "The escape pods will be on the port side, but they may already be launched." They found a maintenance shaft and climbed downward, Vethrak's 4 arms making the descent far easier for him than for Sira, who had to cling to the rungs with her one good arm while her injured shoulder screamed in protest. Behind them she could hear pursuit, clicking mandibles and pounding footsteps. Officers who had recovered from the chaos and were now hunting the traitor and his prisoner. They emerged on Deck 7 to find it already filling with smoke. Somewhere nearby, fires were burning, and the air tasted of melting plastic and ozone. But Sira could see the row of escape pod hatches lining the corridor ahead. "There," she said, pointing to one that still showed a green status light. "That one is still functional." They ran, smoke stinging Sarah's eyes and lungs. And behind them, the sound of pursuit was getting closer. Vethrak reached the pod first and slammed his palm against the activation panel. And the hatch slid open to reveal a cramped interior designed for Cathari anatomy, but just barely large enough for a human. "Get in," he said. And Sira did not argue. She threw herself into the pod and pulled herself into one of the seats, fumbling with restraints that were clearly not designed for her body. Vethrak hesitated at the hatch, looking back down the corridor where his former crewmates were emerging from the smoke. "Vethrak!" Sira shouted. "Get in now." He looked at her with those alien eyes that she was finally beginning to understand. And she saw something there that transcended species fear and hope and uncertainty and the desperate. Courage of someone choosing to leap into the unknown. "Hey," stepped into the pod and sealed the hatch behind him. 3 seconds later, the launch mechanism fired, and they were hurtling away from the dying warship, spinning into the chaos of the battlefield. Two enemies who had somehow become something else entirely. Through the tiny viewport, Sarah could see the flash of weapons fire and the silent explosions of ships being destroyed. Human and Cathari alike, but the human fleet was winning. They were carving through the ambush like a blade through flesh. Precise and devastating and utterly relentless. "They came for you," Vethrak said, his voice quiet with wonder. "All of this destruction, all of this sacrifice. They came because you mattered to them." Sarah watched her people fighting and dying to reach her, and she felt the weight of their devotion pressing against her chest. "Yes," she said, "and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worth it." The pod tumbled through the void, and somewhere in the distance, a human ship was already turning toward them, already moving to bring them home. Sub-Commander Vethrak stood on the bridge of the Knife of Purpose and watched the tactical display with growing confusion. The human fleet had entered the Vareth Nebula exactly as predicted. Drawn by the distress beacon and the promise of a survivor to rescue. But everything else was wrong. They were supposed to be rescue ships. Small, fast vessels designed for extraction. The kind of targets that would be easy prey for the hidden armada. Instead, the display showed battle cruisers and destroyers and carrier groups. More firepower than any sane species would commit to saving a single soldier. "This is not a rescue fleet," his second officer clicked, mandibles trembling with something that might have been fear. "This is an invasion force. They are coming for war." Vethrak did not respond because he was already thinking about the human in the cell below decks. She had said something during their last conversation. Something that was now echoing in his mind, like a warning he had failed to understand. "You have studied how we fight. But have you studied how we think?" He had dismissed it as the desperate words of a prisoner trying to unsettle her captor. But now he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. "The ambush will still succeed," his tactical officer announced, though the confidence in his translated voice sounded forced. "We outnumber them 3-1. The nebula gives us cover. They cannot know our positions," as if in answer to those words. The first explosions bloomed on the tactical display Cathari ships, hidden in the nebula's electromagnetic. Clouds were dying, struck by weapons fire that should not have been able to find them. And Vethrak watched his perfect ambush come apart in flames. "How?" he demanded, turning on his tactical officer with fury building in his thorax. "How are they targeting our concealed positions?" "This is impossible. Unknown Sub-Commander," the officer stammered. "Their fire is too accurate, too precise. It is as if they know exactly where every ship is hidden." The human had been on this ship for 3 days. 3 days of answering questions and eating meals and speaking to guards who were supposed to ignore. Or 3 days of biometric data broadcasting alongside. The distress beacon. Vethrak felt something cold settle in his chest as understanding finally arrived. "The bait," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "She has been sending them information. Everything she learned, every position I showed her. She has been transmitting it all." His bridge crew stared at him in stunned silence. The idea that a single prisoner could compromise an entire military operation was so foreign to Cathari, thinking that they could barely process it into hegemony. Individuals did not matter, could not matter, because the hive was everything and personal action was meaningless, but humans were not. Hive humans were a species where one soldier could change the course of a battle. "Sub-Commander," his communications officer called out. "The lead human vessel is broadcasting on open channels. They are demanding our surrender." Vethrak almost laughed, a sound that came out as a harsh clicking that made his crew flinch away from him. Surrender was not a concept the Cathari truly understood. You fought until you won or you were destroyed. There was no middle ground. No quarter given or expected. But then the communications officer added something that made Vethrak's mandibles go still. They are offering to accept prisoners. Sub-Commander, they say they will take any Kethari who surrenders into custody and treat them according to something called the Galactic Convention on Warfare. The bridge went silent in 200 years of conflict. The Kethari had never taken prisoners and had never expected their enemies to take. Prisoners, either defeated soldiers, were killed or abandoned. That was simply the way of war. Resources should not be wasted on units that had failed their purpose. But the humans were offering to spare those who surrendered. It made no sense. It was inefficient and irrational, and completely contrary to every principle of military logic. And yet they were doing it anyway. Vethrock thought again of the woman in the cell below. She had asked him why her species named their ships, why they mourned their dead, why they risked everything to save a single soldier. He had dismissed those questions as irrelevant to the practical business of war. Now he was beginning to understand that they were not irrelevant at all. They were the key to everything. The human fleet is not trying to destroy us, he realized aloud, and the words felt strange coming from his mandibles. They are trying to rescue their soldier while minimizing our casualties. That is why they are targeting our weapons and engines instead of our reactor cores. That is inefficient. His tactical officer protested. Destroying us would be faster and safer for them. Yes, Vethrock agreed. It would, but efficiency is not what drives them. Something else does. Something I'm only beginning to understand. He turned away from the tactical display and made a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. "I am going to the holding cell," he announced. "Maintain defensive positions but do not initiate engagement. I need to speak with the prisoner." His crew stared at him as if he had gone mad. But none of them challenged his orders. He was still the sub-commander, still their superior. And the hive structure demanded obedience even when the orders made no sense. Vethrak moved through corridors that shook with distant impacts, emergency lights flickering as the ship took damage from the ongoing battle. And his mind raced with thoughts that felt like heresy. The human had manipulated him from the moment she woke in that cell. Every conversation, every question, every word of seeming philosophy had been part of a plan to make him doubt himself and to buy time for her transmissions to reach her fleet. She had used her captivity as a weapon. She had turned the trap inside out and made the hunters into the prey. And somehow, despite everything, Vethrak found himself not angry but fascinated. He reached the holding cell and opened the door to find the human standing in the center of the room, her restraints hanging loose from her wrists, where she had somehow managed to unlock them. She looked at him with those strange soft eyes that held no compound facets, no glittering biological machinery, just simple organic orbs that somehow conveyed more emotion than any Kethari face ever could. "I was wondering when you would come," she said. Vethrak stepped into the cell and let the door close behind him. "You are not bait," he said. And the words came out almost like an accusation. "You were never bait. You were the trap all along." The human nodded. "I told you," she said. "You studied how we fight, but not how we think. You assumed I would wait to be rescued, because that is what prey does. But humans are not prey. Even when we are captured, even when we are alone, even when everyone tells us we should just give up and die." She took a step toward him, and Vethrak found himself taking a step back. Something he had never done in the presence of any enemy. "You thought our attachment to individuals was a weakness," she continued. "But you had it backwards. It is our greatest strength. Because it means every single one of us matters, and every single one of us knows it. So every single one of us fights like the fate of the universe depends on what we do." The ship shuddered with another impact, and alarms began wailing in the corridor outside. "Your fleet is losing," the human said. Not with triumph, but with something that sounded almost like regret. "My people will not stop until I am safe, and they will tear through every ship in this nebula to reach me. You can still surrender. You can still survive this." Vethrak stared at her and felt the foundations of everything he had believed beginning to crack. One human, one individual, and she had destroyed an armada. "I was told to execute you," he said slowly. "Now that the battle has turned, you are no longer useful as bait. My orders are to terminate you before you can be rescued." The human did not flinch. "I know," she said. "So why are you still talking to me?" It was the same question she had asked that first day in the cell. And Vethrak realized he still did not have a good answer. All he knew was that killing her felt wrong in a way he could not explain. Wrong in a way that had nothing to do with tactics or efficiency or the demands of the hive. "Help me reach the escape pods," the human said, and her voice was calm and steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Come with me. Surrender to my people. And I will speak for you when this is over." "Why would you do that?" Vethrak asked. "I am your enemy. I held you prisoner. My people killed your crew." The human smiled. And it was not the cold, hard smile he had seen before. It was something warmer and more confusing. "Because you hesitated," she said. "Because you asked questions instead of just following orders. Because somewhere under all that chitin you were trying to understand instead of just reacting. And that means there is hope for you." Vethrak looked at the weapon in his lower hands. The weapon he was supposed to use to end her life. And made a choice that no Cathari had ever made before he lowered. "If your kind truly would risk everything for one person?" he asked. The human nodded. "And one person would risk everything for them?" she replied. Vethrak gestured toward the door with one of his upper arms. "Then show me," he said. "Show me how to be worth something more than my function." They left the cell together. Captor and captive, enemy and something that was not quite an ally yet. Walking into the chaos of a battle that one human had transformed from a trap into a reckoning. Lieutenant Yunsir awoke to the taste of blood in her mouth and the hum of alien machinery vibrating through her skull. She tried to move, but her wrists were locked behind her back in restraints that felt like cold metal wrapped in something organic. Something that pulsed against her skin like it was alive. The room around her was dark, except for a pale blue glow coming from strips along the walls. And the air smelled wrong, sharp and chemical with an undertone of something rotting. Her training kicked in before panic could take hold. She was alive, which meant someone wanted her alive, and that gave her leverage, even if she did not yet understand what kind. The last thing she remembered was the bridge of the Sentinel Dawn lighting up with weapons fire, a crew shouting coordinates and damage reports, and then a blast that sent her flying into the Diaz navigation console. After that, there was nothing but darkness until now. She forced herself to breathe slowly and take stock of her situation. Her flight suit was torn at the shoulder, and dried blood crusted along her arm. But she could move her fingers and toes, which meant no spinal damage. The restraints held her to a wall that curved slightly, suggesting she was on a ship rather than a station, and she was alone. That last thought hit her harder than the rest. Where was her crew? Where was Commander Hask and Petty Officer Chung and the others who had been fighting beside her just hours or days ago? A sound interrupted her thoughts. A clicking noise like dozens of small stones being struck together in rapid sequence. A section of the wall slid open, and something stepped through. Sarah had seen images of the Cathari in military briefings, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of one standing 3 meters away. It was tall, nearly 2.5 meters, with a segmented body covered in plates of dark chitin that reflected the blue light like oil on water. Its head was triangular, with compound eyes that glittered with hundreds of tiny facets. And its mouth was a nightmare of mandibles that never stopped moving. 4 arms emerged from its thorax, The upper pair thick and powerful, the lower pair smaller and more delicate. Currently holding a device that pulsed with the same blue light as the walls. "You are conscious," it said. And the words came not from its mandibles, but from a translator disc mounted on its chest, rendering its clicks and hisses into flat mechanical English. "Where's my crew?" Sierra demanded. And she was proud that her voice did not shake. The Cathari tilted its head in a gesture that might have meant curiosity, or might have meant nothing at all. "Terminated," it said. As casually as a human might mention the weather, they served no purpose and were therefore eliminated. "All except you." Sierra felt the words like a punch to her stomach. Chun with his terrible jokes. Hask, who had commanded them for 3 years. Young Rodriguez, who had just made specialist last month. All of them gone. Terminated like malfunctioning equipment. She wanted to scream, but instead she locked the grief away in a box inside her mind where it could wait until she had the luxury of feeling it. "Why?" she asked. And the word came out cold and hard. "Why keep me alive?" The Cathari stepped closer, and Sarah could smell it now. A scent like copper and crushed insects. "I am Sub-Commander Vethrak of the Cathari hegemony," it said. "And you are alive because your species has a weakness that we intend to exploit." "What weakness?" Vethrak's mandibles clicked in what the translator rendered as a dry, mechanical laugh. "Your irrational attachment to individual members of your species," he said. "We have studied your kind extensively. You send rescue missions for single soldiers. You risk entire ships to recover one survivor. You mourn your dead as if each one mattered." He gestured with one of his smaller arms toward a panel on the wall that lit up with a display. "Your ship's distress beacon is currently broadcasting on emergency frequencies," he continued. "It has been modified to indicate that there is one survivor in need of immediate extraction. And when your fleet comes to rescue you, they will fly directly into the ambush we have prepared." Sierra stared at the display, which showed a tactical map of the Vareth Nebula with hundreds of red markers hidden within the swirling gases. An entire armada waiting in silence for human ships to come looking for her. "You are bait," Vethrak said, and the translator somehow conveyed satisfaction in its flat tone. "Your fleet will come because they cannot accept the loss of even one soldier, and that sentimentality will be their destruction. They will not fall for something so obvious," Sarah said. But even as she spoke, she knew she was wrong. They would come, of course they would come. Humanity had built its entire military doctrine around the principle that no one got left behind. And the Cathari had weaponized that principle against them. Vethrak seemed to read her thoughts in her expression. "You know they will come," he said. "Your kind cannot help themselves. It is an evolutionary defect that makes you predictable. A hive would never risk the collective for a single damaged unit. But humans will sacrifice thousands to save one." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "You will remain here until your usefulness is concluded," he said. "After the battle, if you still live, you will be terminated like the others. But for now, you will be kept in acceptable condition, fed and watered and maintained. Because bait that dies too soon serves no purpose." "Wait," Sarah called out. And something in her voice made the alien pause. She met those compound eyes with her own and asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she woke. "Why did you not kill me with the others? You could have just faked the beacon signal without keeping me alive. So why am I really here?" Vethrak stood motionless for a long moment. And when he spoke again, there was something in his translated voice that might have been uncertainty. "A living signal is stronger than a fabricated one," he said. "Your biometrics broadcast alongside the beacon. Confirming your survival, the bait must live for the trap to work. Your people would detect a forgery, but they cannot doubt the evidence of a beating heart." He stepped through the doorway, and the wall sealed shut behind him. Sarah was alone again in the blue darkness, surrounded by enemies. knowing that every ship that came to save her would be flying into death. She closed her eyes and let herself feel one moment of despair. Then she opened them again and began to think she was bait. But she was also human, and humans did not just wait to be rescued. The Cathari thought they understood her species, thought that human loyalty was a weakness to be exploited. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed the bait would stay on the hook. Sarah smiled in the darkness. A cold, hard smile that would have worried Vethrak if he had seen it. They wanted her alive, which meant they would keep her close, which meant she would learn and watch and wait. And when the time came, she would show them exactly what humans did when you threatened the people they loved. The bait had to live. Vethrak had said he was right about that much. She intended to live long enough to make them regret every choice that led them to this moment. 3 days passed in the blue-lit cell, and Sierra learned to read the rhythms of the Cathari ship. She counted the footsteps of guards passing her door, memorized the vibration patterns of the engines, and listened to the distant clicks and hisses of alien communication that echoed through the walls. They fed her twice a day. A nutrient paste that tasted like cardboard mixed with metal, delivered by a guard who never spoke and never looked at her with those glittering, compound eyes. But Sarah spoke to him anyway. "Thank you," she said on the second day when he slid the tray through the slot in the wall, and the guard froze as if she had attacked him. "The food is not pleasant, but I appreciate that you bring it," she continued in a calm and friendly tone. "My name is Sarah. What is yours?" The guard stared at her for a long moment, mandibles twitching in what might have been confusion, then turned and left without responding. She did the same thing the next time, and the time after that, always offering thanks, always asking questions, always treating the guard like a person rather than a jailer. On the third day, the guard paused at the door after delivering her food. "Communication with bait is not required," he said through his translator, his voice even flatter than Vethrak's. "I know," Sarah replied with a small smile, "but I am human, and humans talk. It is what we do even when no one requires it." The guard tilted his head in that curious gesture. She was beginning to recognize. "You waste energy on purposeless action," he said. "This is inefficient." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "Or maybe connection is never purposeless. Maybe talking to you makes me stronger, even if you do not answer. Maybe it makes you think about things you would not otherwise consider." The guard left without another word, but Sarah noticed that he stood at the door a moment longer than necessary before walking away. She filed that observation in her mind alongside everything else she was learning. The Gethari were not machines. Despite their hive-like structure, they could be surprised and confused and made to hesitate. And that meant they could be influenced. Vethrak came to her cell that evening for what she had started thinking of as his interrogation sessions. Though they were unlike any interrogation she had trained for, he did not ask about fleet movements or weapon systems or military secrets. Instead, he asked questions that seemed almost philosophical. "Your ship was named Sentinel Dawn," he said, settling his long body into a position that might have been standing or sitting. It was hard to tell with Cathari anatomy. "Why do humans name their vessels?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "Because a ship is more than metal and circuits to us," she said. "It becomes part of our community. We live on it and work on it and sometimes die on it. Giving it a name makes it real, makes it matter. But the vessel does not know its name," Vethrak said. "It cannot appreciate the designation. It is merely material shaped for function. The name is not for the ship," Sarah explained. "It is for us. It reminds us that we are not just operating equipment. We are caring for something, defending something, belonging to something." Vethrak was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could almost see the gears turning behind those compound eyes. "Your species creates meaning where none exists," he said finally. You assign value to objects and individuals based on emotional attachment rather than practical utility. It is fundamentally irrational. Is it? Sierra asked, leaning forward as much as her restraints would allow. You have studied how we fight. You know that humans will charge into certain death to save a wounded comrade. We'll hold a position against impossible odds because surrender means leaving someone behind. You'd call that weakness, but it makes us terrifying in battle. She let her voice drop to something quieter. More dangerous. You think our attachments make us predictable, and you are right. But have you considered what those attachments make us capable of? A Tetheri soldier fights for the hive because the hive is everything. But a human soldier fights for the person standing next to them, for the name on the ship, for the promise that they will never be abandoned. She met his gaze with steady eyes. You have studied how we fight. Sub-Commander, but have you studied how we think? Because those are not the same thing. Vethrak rose abruptly, his mandibles clicking in a pattern she could not interpret. Your words are designed to confuse, he said. To make me doubt the clarity of Kethari purpose? It will not work. I am not trying to confuse you, Sierra said. I am trying to help you understand. Because when my people come, and they will come, they will not behave the way your tactical models predict. They never do. Your people will fly into the nebula to rescue you, and they will be destroyed, Vethrak said. But there was something in his translated voice that sounded less certain than before. This is the plan, and the plan is sound. Then why do you keep coming to talk to me? Sierra asked. Why do you ask me about names and meanings and attachments? If you were so confident that none of it matters, Vethrak did not answer. He turned and left the cell. And Sierra allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. She was planting seeds. Tiny doubts in the rigid certainty of the Kethari mind. And she had no idea if they would ever bear fruit. But it was all she could do from inside this cell that night. As she lay in the darkness listening to the hum of the alien ship, she used the one advantage she had that the Kethari did not know about. The neural implant in her skull was standard issue for all United Galactic Navy officers, designed for emergency communication when normal channels failed. And the Kethari had not thought to scan for it, because their own technology did not include anything similar. They did not understand why a species would put machines inside their own bodies. The implant could not send complex messages without risking detection. But it could do something simpler. It could modify the distress beacon that Vethrak was so proud of every time Sarah adjusted her position in the cell. The implant sent a tiny pulse of data encoded in her biometric signal, invisible to Kethari sensors, but crystal clear to any human ship that knew what to look for. She had spent the last 3 days mapping everything she had learned about the ship and the ambush fleet, counting patrol rotations, memorizing the positions of the hidden armada that Vethrak had shown her, and encoding it all in those tiny pulses. The humans were coming. That much was certain, but they would not be coming blind. A sudden alarm cut through the ship, a harsh shrieking sound that made Sierra's ears ring. And she heard rapid footsteps in the corridor outside her cell. A door slid open, and a Kethari officer she did not recognize stood in the entrance. Compound eyes wide with what might have been shock. Human vessels detected, the officer said, the words tumbling out in a rush, approaching the nebula at high speed. But there is a problem. Sierra smiled. Let me guess, she said. There are more of them than you expected. The officer stared at her for a moment, then rushed away without answering. Through the open door, Sierra could hear voices raised in alarm, could feel the vibration of the ship changing as it prepared for a battle that was not going according to plan. The bait had done more than survive. The bait had been thinking, and watching, and sending everything she learned to the people who were coming to save her. Now it was time to see what humans did. When they stopped being predictable,